For the past several years, Americans have been bombarded with hate, outrage, and offense. Social media, legacy media, music, films, virtually every corner of society seem to be pushing you toward taking a stand on something. Anything. As long as you could add a new flag to your bio, slap a new button on your clothes, or give some other outward display of allyship to one cause or another. But what if you didn't feel comfortable doing that? What if you didn't feel well informed enough about a particular issue, or simply wanted to keep your feelings to yourself? Well, then you were hit with a barrage of slogans like silence equals compliance, or silence equals violence, or the ever so subtle silence equals death. And like a bastardized version of the Harry Potter sorting hat, there was this unrelenting need to discover where you stood on every issue and at any given point in time. Are you with us or against us? Are you an ally or an adversary? Social media fed you more of what you already believed, reinforcing that your viewpoint was the only one that was virtuous and just in this world. Media outlets packaged conflict as content, presenting every little issue as a line in the sand moment, making you believe that if you weren't already outraged by something, you probably should be. Now, all of these mostly fabricated points of contention popped up, turning the simplest little thing into a massive issue, and you just couldn't get away from it. Not even at work. I mean, did you ever even hear the term microaggression until some HR consultant informed you that you were guilty of committing dozens of these each and every day? I mean, you knew in your heart that you weren't guilty of whatever ist or ism was hot that week, but you were fed courses and books and articles and mandatory training that convinced you that you were just blindsided by your own ignorance or privilege or bigotry to see it. And it was rough to watch, right? I mean, good people you've known for years and who have known you too, slowly got absorbed into the mob.
I am Locutus of Borg. Resistance is futile.
You either joined in or kept your head down because you saw what happened to people who didn't play along. Character assassination, termination, blacklisting, I mean, everything was on the table for a while there. Don't believe me? Look at what happened to Jennifer Say, a former U.S. national gymnastics champion, a friggin' wildly successful marketing executive, yes, I'm a little jealous, and heir apparent to the big chair at Levi Strauss. Now, she would have been the first woman CEO of that company's history, but instead, she saw her 22-plus year tenure there come to an abrupt halt just because she dared to ask the question of, maybe school closings and mask mandates were doing more harm than good for kids. She was ultimately forced to resign from the company, but this is awesome. She rejected $1 million severance package and the hush clause that came along with it so she could share her story with the world. The book Unbuttoned is an absolute page-turner, and I highly recommend it. And her story, as compelling as it is just one of thousands, maybe millions, of people who dealt with similar play ball or shut up dilemmas in the workplace. Now, it's a little tough to determine when exactly things got so polarized, where this sense of groupthink and states of perpetual offense started to take root. But if you're paying attention, there are signs all over the place that the tide is starting to turn. There are some subtle but meaningful shifts in the culture that seem to indicate that Outrage Inc. is starting to self-destruct. Stick around, we'll show you. Hey folks, Mark here with the Rational Workforce. Thanks so much for tuning in. Now, I'm not sure if the world is generally fed up with the steady diet of negative content we've been fed for the better part of a decade, or if the existential threat of AI stealing all of our jobs is forging a new sense of we're all in this together solidarity, but I really do think the days of mandatory and manufactured outrage is finally dying away. And I've got some receipts. Let's take a look. So let's tackle the ugliest one first and just get it over with. Let's look at politics. Now, I'm recording this episode just days after the first State of the Union address of President Trump's second term, and using that event as a litmus test, it may seem crazy to say that some sense of levelheadedness and bipartisanship are afoot in the world of politics, but hear me out. Because we're seeing some encouraging signs of rationality coming from some very unlikely sources. We've got Democratic Senator John Fetterman of Pennsylvania, a gentleman who certainly has a reputation for marching to his own beat. Well, he's recently been calling out members of his own party for their displays of hyperpartisanship.
The State of the Union can't turn into like the Springer Show.
We've seen Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer, who could never be called a Trump supporter, proactively and publicly thank the president for his efforts to bring more industrial jobs back into the state.
Probably not on the bingo card, but I want to thank President Trump for his work on this.
We've got State Auditor Dana DiZoglio from my home state, Massachusetts, who's taking her own party to court because Mass lawmakers are blocking her ability to audit the state's books, an activity that 72% of Mass voters said they actually wanted.
Today, my office has officially filed a lawsuit seeking to audit the Massachusetts legislature, and this day has been a long time coming.
And let's stick in Massachusetts. We even have Elizabeth Warren, Democratic senator there, and pretty much sworn enemy of the president, who stood up and applauded during that State of the Union address.
Members of Congress cannot corruptly profit from using insider information.
I mean, sure, it was only during the part where he talked about banning Congress from trading stocks. But hey, we've got to take that common ground where we can find it. We've got to acknowledge it. And I didn't have any of this on my 2026 bingo card. But here we are. After one of the ugliest, most contentious, most vitriol-fueled elections in modern history, the very people who vocally opposed Trump, and in most ways still do, can still find some areas of agreement. Now, I know we have a long way to go, but I think we have to acknowledge the bravery for these folks who broke from the pack, and we're all going to be better for it. All right, you want some more receipts? Let's take a look at the world of sports. Now, unless you've been living under a rock, you already know that both the men's and women's USA hockey teams took home the gold this year. The women and the men both squeaked out a tough overtime win against the Canadians. Both teams played their hearts out. Both teams earned every right to celebrate as long and as loud as they liked. But even in this moment that every American should have enjoyed, the mob just had to get going. While covering the post-game celebration in the men's locker room, a camera crew recorded the team taking a call from the president, congratulating them on their victory. Nothing out of the ordinary there, right? Now, during that call, Trump cracked a joke that's pretty much on par with any dad joke you're ever going to hear out of your fathers or your grandfathers, when he said, "You know I'm going to have to invite the women's team too. If I don't, I'll get impeached." Now, in the real world, that would have been a total nothing, a throwaway, just a goofy line said in jest. But not for the perpetually aggrieved. The reporters and pundits and media outlets that have grown addicted to your angry posts and shares and all of that delicious ad revenue that comes along with it told you that this was an outrage-worthy offense, not just for Trump, but for the men's hockey team in general. I mean, imagine you just finished getting the shit kicked out of you for 3+ periods, you're knocking back some beers with your friends, and now you're catching flack for laughing at a dad joke made by the president of the country whose name appears in the front of your uniform. I mean, activists wanted you to be angry, reporters definitely wanted you to be angry. But every time they tried to bait one of the members from the women's team to take a swing at their male counterparts, they didn't. And it was awesome.
Have a response, like, it's unfortunate, the conversations surrounding it, like where it's gone throughout social media. But all I can say is, like, I've never been more proud to pull on the USA jersey, and I think for a lot of us, like, it's the honor of a lifetime to represent our country.
These women just crushed it on the world stage, but instead of celebrating their amazing victory and athleticism and dedication to their craft and everything that got them on that rink, the focus had been on something completely different. It was more important to some people to get offended on their behalf than to acknowledge their awesomeness and talk about stealing joy. Now you might be asking yourself, Mark, the whole premise of this video is that the outrage machine is slowing down. Why are you bringing examples of the media trying to crank it up again? I mean, you have to admit that maybe, just maybe, you're wrong.
No, I don't think I will.
Yeah, now, I think I'm still on the right track, because here's the plot twist. This is a perfect example of the machine winding down because the main characters in their play are just refusing to take part. They're rejecting the script that they've had to run with for the past several years, and I think it's fantastic. And speaking of scripts, let's take a look at some receipts from the world of pop culture and entertainment. Now, recently HBO introduced its latest creation from the Game of Thrones universe, an amazing series called A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. This series takes a hard break from the darkness and nihilism that's typical of the world of Westeros, and instead focuses on a simple but pure-hearted knight named Duncan the Tall, his young and wise beyond his years Squire Egg, and the bond they form throughout their adventures. There's no meta-commentary on contemporary topics, there are no trappings of modern messaging creeping around the edges, there's no reimagining for a modern audience. It's just a heartfelt exploration of topics that are as old as time. Chivalry versus cruelty, right versus wrong, all those things, and it's crushing it. Now, critically, it's more than holding its own. It's currently sitting with an overall Rotten Tomatoes rating of 94% fresh, and that's great in its own right. But what's more noteworthy about this is that the show is actually picking up steam. Word of mouth has been so overwhelmingly positive that the show's popularity is actually growing. The season finale reflected a 42% ratings increase versus the first episode, and the show now routinely averages 24 to 26 million global viewers. Now you contrast that with other shows that have been criticized, rightly or wrongly, for injecting modern themes into their lore, and I don't know, it's a pretty compelling story. Amazon's The Rings of Power is something that should have been a slam dunk success from day one, if only they stuck with J.R.R. Tolkien's original vision, experienced a monumental decline from its debut, both in terms of viewership and in total minutes watched. Even House of the Dragon, a show that's also from the Game of Thrones universe, saw declining viewership week after week after week. And then we have the absolute freaking poster child of breaking canon in an attempt to appeal to a modern audience, Star Trek Starfleet Academy. I mean, that can't even break into the Nielsen top 10 despite a massive budget of $100 million per season. Now, I'm not trying to say that one show is better than the other, that's subjective and that's a matter of taste. But when viewed through the lens of what's actually doing best financially and which is having a greater cultural impact, it's tough to argue that the show with the most old-fashioned sentiments is also the one that's crushing it. I'm also thrilled to see that it seems to be successful under its own steam. We've seen other sci-fi or fantasy shows such as The Acolyte, Obi-Wan, Ahsoka, She-Hulk, Ironheart, Secret Invasion. They've all underperformed or become outright flops, only to have poor reviews and declining viewership blamed on review bombing by bigoted fans guilty of an Easterism. And this is where Hollywood has taken a page out of the workplace playbook. Just as we described at the top of the episode, anyone who pushed back on the ideologies being forced upon them in the workplace was being labeled with some form of Easterism as a means of bullying them into compliance. Studios and networks began doing it writ large. And as of now, it looks like the audience just ain't having it. It doesn't mean there weren't some idiotic fans who made repugnant comments on the internet. That's the dark side of social media, and those voices deserve to be ignored and starved of oxygen. But the presence of those comments doesn't mean the creators should dodge responsibility for producing shoddy content. For a really long time, both in corporate America and in pop culture in general, those who have shoved ideological stances down our throats have used those stances as both a sword and a shield. Except every policy that we throw under this umbrella is virtuous and true, and don't you dare question why or you'll be tarred and feathered. It was a tactic that worked really well for a really long time, and it had a great run, but it has become so abused, it has strayed so far from its original altruistic intents, it's just become performative. It's rapidly approaching butt of the joke status. Virtue signaling and the constant state of anger it requires once made people reactionary, but now it's just making them weary. Whatever cultural movement created the perpetually aggrieved state of affairs that we're in today has also overplayed its hand. When everything is problematic, nothing is problematic. When human systems feel chaotic, when politics feels toxic, when technology feels destabilizing, some people will continue to spiral, but others, an increasing number, will search for grounding. Look, we're at a fork in the road culturally. One path leads to deeper cynicism, the other leads to deeper meaning. And I think more people than we realize are starting to choose that second path. It doesn't mean that outrage disappears overnight. Outrage is still profitable and addictive and easy, and some people have really decided and found a way to hone it as a way to achieve their goals. Now, there are entire industries that are built on keeping us agitated and looking for the worst of humanity lurking in every corner, but I sense fatigue. Fatigue with purity tests, fatigue with having to signal allegiance at every turn, fatigue with being told that if you don't endorse every plank of a platform, you're a traitor to the cause. These cultural touchstones, these micro trends, provide clues as to where society in general and the workplace in specific is headed. The problem is that the workplace is often well behind the times when it comes to noticing and addressing the sentiment of the people who make up the workforce. And that's why they're perpetually behind the 8 ball when it comes to workplace culture. And that just makes things uncomfortable for everyone. Now, for years, companies have navigated intense internal and external pressure to take public stances on cultural issues. Some did so thoughtfully, others did so reactively, and HR departments in particular often found themselves in the crosshairs, tasked with translating cultural events into policy and internal messaging. But for a long time, I think they misread the room and even worse, actively resisted or shouted down the voices who were trying to warn them. Now we're seeing the government stepping in as promised and passing legislation that I'm sure some will feel is both heavy-handed and coming out of left field. Now, just before I recorded this video, the Equal Employment Opportunity Chair, Andrea Lucas, put Fortune 500 companies on notice. She published a letter reminding them of their commitment to uphold the 1964 Civil Rights Act and ensure that no one, including old white guys that have become the villain in every single plot, is discriminated against at work. Now, this should be a good thing, right? There should be rejoicing that the government is enforcing policies that make sure everyone gets a fair shake. I mean, that's what we've been told the goal of all the ideological posturing the workforce has been subjected to, with increasing vitriol, during the past decade, right? But in our heart of hearts, and I think even if you're a supporter, you have to agree on some level, that we know that's not what the past decade has been about. It may have started as a let's make sure everyone gets a fair shake, but somewhere along the line, it devolved into revenge. Revenge against an entire category of people upon which every injustice, real or imagined, was somehow responsible for committing. It didn't matter if it was an accurate assessment, it didn't matter if there was any truth to it or not. It just felt good to put those bastards in their place, didn't it? And it worked. Until it didn't. So many people have been on the receiving end of outrage from the mob. So many people have been sorted into the "you're against us" house simply for holding a different opinion, that we're actually seeing the early stages of this cultural shift in play. And as a result, you might see less appetite for hardline ideological declarations from corporate leadership. You might see employees who previously kept their heads down because they were too scared to voice opposing views now begin to speak a little more openly about their beliefs. And at the very least, you might see people push back on some of the stuff that's been forced upon them during the past several years. I think workers are coming to the conclusion that maybe the workplace isn't necessarily the best venue for activism or social validation. I think that the very entity that tells you that you're part of a family on Monday, then terminates you without cause on Friday, doesn't necessarily have your best interests at heart all the time. And most of all, I think that maybe work just needs to be about work again. Then employers should go back to focusing on all the stuff that workers, regardless of background, can rally around, and how they can improve their financial and professional security in return. I really do think this shift is coming, but I'm not convinced that every HR department got the memo. I mean, if you spend enough time on LinkedIn, you can still feel the energy of 2021 in some corners. If we are, in fact, at an inflection point, even a small one, clinging to an outdated cultural posture will create friction. This doesn't mean the company should abandon their values, far from it. It just means they should be attentive to the tone. It means they should recognize that many workers are looking for stability, excellence, and meaning more than they're looking for another lecture. And here's where savvy employers will recognize an opportunity to leapfrog their competitors. Workplaces that allow and encourage civil disagreement, that seek ideological diversity without fear of exile, will have fewer blind spots and attract more resilient, more capable, more independent workers. Organizations that focus on delivering excellent products and services while respecting the full humanity of their employees, will stand out in a noisy environment where too many companies still take stances that marginalize an increasing number of customers and workers. And they'll end up paying the price for doing so. HR leaders who can create space for nuance rather than enforce conformity will earn trust, and that is a commodity that is more valuable than gold right now. I'm not declaring the culture war is over, and I'm absolutely not naive about how entrenched some of these battles are. And those who benefit most from outrage will not surrender quietly. But I am hopeful. I see cracks in algorithmic bubbles. I see audiences rewarding stories that emphasize character over ideology. I see young people downloading prayer apps not because someone forced them to, but because they're searching. And maybe, just maybe, we're not as divided as the loudest corners of the internet would have us believe. Maybe joy is actually staging a comeback. And if that's true, the workplace will not be immune. And the leaders who pay attention now will be better positioned for whatever comes next. And that's something we should all be able to get behind, right? But that's just my opinion. I'd love to hear what you think. Are you seeing some of the same signals, or am I reading too much into a handful of headlines and box office reports? Let me know. Also, just a quick heads up that we are now syndicated across all of the major podcast platforms. So if you don't want to look at my face made for radio, you can tune in on Apple, Spotify, Pandora, iHeartRadio, wherever you go to listen to podcasts. You can find the Rational Workforce. And as always, if you like what you saw, click like, ring the bell, subscribe, do all the things that'll help keep the channel growing, and we'll keep cranking out the content. So with that, I'm going to sign off. Thanks so much for stopping by. Have an amazing week. We'll catch you on the next one.